The following program is an original production of WYCC PBS Chicago.
Tonight, one of the most famous speeches in American history, 50 years later. Martin Luther King had a dream, but how much of it came true? Chicagoans look back and look ahead.
The first week of school, the first test of the CPS Safe Passage program, safely walking kids to new schools through dangerous gang turf. Does CPS make the grade? Our panel weighs in.
Plus, a reality show that's out of this world, looking for adventurous people who'd actually move to Mars. The concept and the Chicagoan vying for a spot. Those stories and much more tonight on In the Loop.
Good evening, I'm Barbara Pinto.
And I'm Chris Bury. This week marks the anniversary of a pivotal moment in American history. The day 50 years ago that Martin Luther King declared he had a dream for all Americans.
His iconic speech was part of the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, an event that played a crucial role in the fight for civil rights. Tonight,
as the country commemorates the 50th anniversary of that march, we speak to Chicagoans who made the pilgrimage to Washington.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
The unforgettable words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., marking a pivotal day in civil rights history, August 28, 1963. 250,000 people from all corners of America, including thousands from Chicago, descending on the National Mall. It was called the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Fast forward 50 years. The nation's first African-American president leads the Let Freedom Ring celebration at the Lincoln Memorial, honoring the anniversary of a watershed moment in civil rights history.
And because they kept marching, America changed. Because they marched, the civil rights law was passed. Because they marched, a voting rights law was signed. Because they marched, doors of opportunity and education swung open so their daughters and sons could finally imagine a life for themselves beyond washing somebody else's laundry.
Over the weekend, Chicagoans paid tribute in their own way, many gathering at the DuSable Museum for a day of remembering, including civil rights attorney Thomas Todd.
You'll hear about Dr. King over and over again that he had a dream. Yes, but Dr. King was more than a dreamer. He worked. It was his work, and so we must work. Oh, I know you got all this fancy equipment and all this technology, but I say to you, I don't care how advanced your technology is, you still can't download freedom. There is no app for freedom.
Former Chicago NAACP board member Brunetta Howell Barrett was among those who traveled to D.C. 5 decades ago, by bus and by train, just to be part of Dr. King's dream.
I found that just being there was quite an experience, and I was just overjoyed to see all these people come flowing in. It seemed that they just never stopped coming in.
Ron Decker was a young law school graduate in 1963. He recalls vividly a shared spirit of unity and support.
As I supported the goals of King, of Dr. King, and of the civil rights movement, and then to end segregation, I felt it was a very important issue.
For John Lewis, who went to Washington, D.C. as a member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Dr. King's speech remains close to his heart and thoughts all these years later.
I remember Dr. King in his speech saying they issued us a bad check. We came to D.C. to cash this check. And they're saying there are no funds, but we're saying that they are.
So we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice.
The message from Dr. King that day still rings loud to many Chicagoans, including radio host Cliff Kelly, who spent much of his career covering civil rights. And Cliff, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Do you think Dr. King would be pleased at the progress that has been made?
Dr. King would still be marching. The progress has been made for some, but when you look at, Chris, really the statistics of where we are relative to jobs, to finances, to homelessness, to poverty, we still have major problems. In fact, in some of those instances, we are actually worse off than we were 50 years ago.
We are going to get to those statistics in a moment, but here in Chicago, we must also point to the first African-American president, a Chicagoan. We've had 2 mayors who've been African-Americans, school superintendents, aldermen, senators, congressmen. Doesn't that represent some great strides?
It represents great strides, but the problem with that is so many of these people who have made it, and many have, but they haven't reached back to pull up other people. Dr. King was concerned about the masses. And in fact, there's been a complaint, Chris, as we've talked about this over the weeks, that many of the folks who were really involved in civil rights became politicians, and as a result, they had to do some things to get other things done that weren't always in keeping with the betterment of the black community. Dr. King could not be bought off. He wasn't concerned about money, as you probably know. Even when he won the Nobel Peace Prize, he gave that money away. People supported him. Harry Belafonte was a good example. His house was in foreclosure. He was only concerned about the lower class, the poverty. All we hear now about, when we talk about a president, is the middle class. A lot of people complain about that. In fact, some people say, I used to be middle class. There's some major things here that need to be done. Only 21%, according to the statistics, of African Americans who feel that Dr. King's dream has been met. Only 21% of blacks, 54% of whites.
But that tells you that there is a big gap in perception here.
There's a huge gap in perception. There's a larger gap in income between blacks and whites.
Let's get to that income and some of these other statistics.
Sure.
The Chicago Reader has put together a pretty compelling comparison over the last 50 years of Chicago then and now. And we look at segregation. Segregation in Chicago has lessened a little bit. There are slightly fewer segregated neighborhoods. The poverty rate is actually a bit worse in the city of Chicago. Median income has gone up for African Americans, but there's still a big gap with the white community. And the unemployment rate is actually much worse.
Yeah.
It's basically doubled, more than doubled from 50 years ago. What story do those numbers tell?
To tell the story, Chris, that some major things need to be done. The very things that Dr. King talked about have not been done. That's why about the check, NSF check, non-sufficient funds. Well, it's even worse now. There were some things that were getting better, but the recession made things even worse for African Americans. The wealthy have done very well. Wealthy people are wealthier than they've ever been and still doing well. But as far as the people in poverty, as far as the underclass, and when we talk about employment, we have unemployment, but we also have people who are working that are in poverty.
Barely making a living wage.
Yeah, exactly, yes, exactly.
When you look at those numbers, isn't part of the story also that many of the more affluent African Americans have moved out of the city to the suburbs and other places, leaving the poorer ones behind?
Well, that's true, in addition to the fact that there's this concerted effort in many places, and particularly Chicago. The number of African Americans in Chicago has diminished because they've torn down all the public housing. That, many people feel, and I'm one of them, that this is intentional. They're tearing down buildings in African American communities now that could be rehabbed. They are not being rehabbed, they're being torn down. There are people out of work, Chris, who could actually put these buildings back to good use. The people could be living in.
You made a point just a moment ago that you're hearing from your listeners a sense of disappointment about even African American politicians. What obligation do African American political leaders and business leaders have to provide better investment and better conditions in the African American communities in Chicago?
They have all of the responsibility to do that. And it's African American people in many instances that put them there. If they're going to do the right thing, they should try to bring up their constituents to the point where things are certainly a lot better than they are now. the discussion about poverty and employment and health care and a lot of other things, that's one thing I have to commend the President for, is the health care, the Affordable Care Act. That's going to help a lot of poor people. But there seems to be this situation where, well, you know, if I help you, what are you going to do for me? It's the people who make the big contributions. As I say, there's a lot of folks who have done very well, but they haven't reached back to pick up all of these people who really, really need the help. And a lot of politicians aren't doing it.
Just a few seconds left,
Sure.
Cliff. The greatest legacy 50 years later of that day.
Oh, hope. There's still that hope. And the interesting thing there, as I'm sure you know, I Have a Dream was not even in his speech.
I know, that was all. That was all there.
Exactly.
Cliff Kelly, on that note, we have to thank you so much for appearing with us
Thank you
today.
so
We
much.
appreciate it very much. Some other trending stories: Chicago students trying to get to their new schools safely, and a potential spoiler already in the race for governor. Here's Barbara with more.
Thanks, Chris. These are two big headlines this week, plus speed demons caught on camera and a new spin on dating.
Sooner or later, something gonna happen. It's something that we can't control. We can't control what gangbangers do.
The first week of the CPS Safe Passage Plan. Even with a heavy police presence, some worried parents chose to drive their kids to school.
If they walk, then they're not safe, you know.
Every welcoming school this fall will have a customized, dedicated safety plan.
Some 12,000 CPS students are now being forced to navigate safe passage routes through dangerous gang territory to get to and from their new schools.
I just hope it works.
State Senator Kwame Raoul considers entering the race for governor.
I've never heard of him, actually.
Some critics say Raoul would only be a spoiler, taking African-American votes away from Governor Quinn and giving Bill Daley the advantage.
He's done some things that I feel pretty good about, and I'd like to see him make that run.
Leadfoots beware, Big Brother is watching you. Starting Monday, robotic speed cameras will start taking pictures of speeding cars.
It's a good thing. Make them slow down.
The cameras are part of Chicago's new Children's Safety Zone program to keep kids safe around parks and playgrounds. Go too fast, you'll get a ticket in the mail.
They should slow down knowing that there's kids that are crossing the street.
From speed cameras to speed dating on 2 wheels. Want to go for a spin? For $15, a local Chicago dating service is matching singles up for a 30-minute divvy date.
I don't know. It sounds like it'd be really hard to talk to someone and actually meet someone while also trying to avoid oncoming traffic.
Here to share their thoughts on tonight's trending stories, journalist, TV and radio host Daryl Denard, president of Media Pros 24/7, and Kavanaugh, and community activist and educator Ana Maria Soto. Thank you so much for joining us. Hello. Let's start with the school year that started this year. On Monday, 400,000 students went back to school, 12,000 of them at new schools, shepherded by hundreds of new workers in the Safe Passage program. Daryl, we'll start with you. How is the program working so far, and is this program sustainable with all of the enhanced protection?
Well, it's going to have to be sustainable. The reality is that we'll be very much premature to try to give a grade on Safe Passage, mainly because it's something that needs to be looked at over the extended school year. Initial reports say that for the first week of school, there have been very few incidents, if any. But the reality is that time will be able to tell us whether or not the inclusion of some 600 additional workers, in addition to the hundreds that already were working with the Safe Passage program, is going to make a dent in terms of the violence that occurs coming from one school to home.
Anne?
Well, I agree with Daryl that they have to do it, but it's very sad to me. These education dollars in CPS are so precious, and we have classrooms where there aren't books. We have kids that don't have money for basic supplies, much less technology, and all this money has to be spent on this. And you know, watching the piece that Chris did about the anniversary of the March on Washington, I think back to all those African American kids who integrated the schools in the South, surrounded by police and security to protect them. It's just sad that this generation of kids needs that kind of security to get through their own communities.
Yeah, Ana Maria, you work in education.
I do. I would love to see Safe Passage neighborhoods. I think this program is part fantasy, part PR. We live in a violent city, and to keep those little pieces of road safe for kids is something that we can't really achieve by just saying that the kids are the ones to be safe. Everybody should be safe in our city. So part of it is we measure ourselves against a tremendous violence in our city. So how are we going to do that? I saw reports like somebody was murdered a block away from the safe passage route. Well, that's going to happen. I think that's the reality that we're living in.
Well, so the sign isn't going to stop anybody from committing a violent act. And if there is violence that's in that neighborhood, just because you have this narrow corridor that's being watched by somebody standing in a fluorescent vest, doesn't mean that somebody is going to stop or is going to prevent somebody from doing a drive-by or hitting somebody over the head with a bat.
So in the long run, how do you measure the success of a program like this?
You measure it by incidences of violence. If those incidents go down, if there aren't any major violent catastrophes that occur during these safe passage routes, then it's going to be touted as an overwhelming success.
And I guess it's the perception too. If parents feel that their kids are safe going to school, if attendance rates stay steady, then I would assume that that would be seen as a success. They said that they had the highest attendance rate in many, many years on Monday, so that's a good sign that people didn't stay home.
Now, another twist on this, Alderman George Cardenas of the 12th Ward suggested this week that the city consider using drones for the Safe Passage program. Is this crazy, brilliant, somewhere in between, Ana Maria?
I think it's crazy. We already have a lot of cameras, so I think the big brother, people watching what's going on, I think we have coverage in terms of the amount of cameras looking at the situation. So drones, I think it's overkill.
Well, I would hope that he was kidding, but you know, knowing Chicago aldermen, maybe not. But seriously, you know, the problem is tied to the schools, I think, because you have these gang issues in the neighborhood because we have kids, especially boys, 12, 13, that have already given up on their futures because they know that their schools cannot prepare them for anything. These schools are not preparing kids for the workplace, for college, for a trade, so they give up. So drones, whatever, I mean, it's silly. We have to get to the basis, give these kids something to hope for, give them a pathway to a better life.
And I think that that's indicative of the problem here. If we were to look at the shootings that have occurred in terms of, I'm not talking about the violence, it's true that violence has gone down vastly over the last 4 years, but because of 24-hour media cycle, we hear about these incidences all the time. The problem here is that we haven't had young people, innocent bystanders, being impacted by this violence. And a lot of it has to do with these are much younger people that are perpetrating the crimes. So they fire indiscriminately as opposed to somebody that's more mature that goes out there and says, I know who I really want to get, and knowing that has a sensibility that says if there's a young person that's next to them, I may stop what I'm going to do at this particular time because I don't want to impact that innocent child.
And how are they going to get the message? Do they watch the news? Do they know that there is a program protecting the routes to schools? I think the perpetrators probably are not aware of. They see these little signs, they probably think it's go shopping or something.
Well, let's leave it at that. We'll make a sharp left turn here. Let's take a look at the gubernatorial race, and Kwame Raoul may dip his foot into the pond here. And I'm just wondering, he is a Democratic state senator from Hyde Park, an attorney. I'm just wondering, Ann, what are his chances in a race with names like Quinn and Daley?
Hey, I would not write off anyone in this gubernatorial race. I mean, it's going to be a crazy year. People all over the state, Democratic, Republican, they are fed up. They're fed up with the horrible state our state is in. I think they're ready for a change. To me, I think the thing to look at with him is if he can come out of this pension committee in Springfield with some kind of pension agreement that at least gets the ball rolling for reforming this insane system, then he can go to the voters and say, hey, look, I have made change. I know how to get something done down there. Nobody else does. He's already polling at 13%, and a lot of people don't know his name around the state.
Bruce Rauner is polling at the same number, and he's spent millions already so far.
Plus, he's very articulate, and I think he would be a great debater. So, you know, I wouldn't rule anybody out.
Daryl, does he stand a chance if there's no pension deal?
Well, that's the problem. You know, that's the 800-pound gorilla in the room here. When we look at Kwame Raoul, he's in a place where he's dagged if he do, he's sort of, you know, darned if he doesn't. because when you look at pension reform in Illinois, noticeably inconspicuous here is anybody on the Republican side talking about pension reform, because they already know that the Democrats have a supermajority and they're the ones that are going to push through pension reform. And no matter what happens, cuts need to be made, and they need to be made deeply. But those cuts are going to adversely affect constituencies that tend to vote Democrat or Democratic. And so who's going to be impacted by that? Whose name is going to be right up there? If it doesn't, if it has a foul taste, it's not me. I wanted deeper cuts. You can have somebody like Annette Daley Quinn come up and say, and then here's Kwame. He was spearheading this effort, and this is what they came up with.
But who do those constituencies want making the pension cuts? Do they want him, who might be a little bit more sympathetic to them, or do they want Bruce Rauner or another Republican? I mean,
I agree,
it's like
but
Nixon had to go to China,
and that's why it's
maybe a Democrat needs to reform pensions.
And Kwame is I know him, he's a fantastic individual, and I think that, all it's going to boil down to is the fact that he's dealing with an incumbent governor, and he's also dealing with somebody with very large pockets in terms of Bill Daley.
We're going to have to move on here. Now we're on to speed cameras. The first speed cameras are up at Gompers Park. I'm just wondering, is this about safety or is it about revenue? Anna Maria?
I think it's a win-win for the city. It's about safety, but I think the revenue is going to be a great thing for the city, and it's a win-win. How can you lose if you're trying to protect kids, speeders, and the only ones impacted are those that have to pay those tickets when you open your mail and all of a sudden you get it and it's painful to get.
but we have red light cameras.
It's on the individual, right? Yeah. So it's very impacted on individuals. So there won't be a group of people crying out for change. So I think it's a win-win.
All right, we have red light cameras. We have speeding cameras now. How much surveillance is too much?
Well, when you talk about drones, people don't realize the drones that they're talking about are not going to be some sort of large amphibious-looking, jet that goes over the city. Drones that they're talking about are going to be small little helicopters that just go, and it's the reality, I don't want to be Orwellian here, but it's the reality that you're already being monitored if you're going to have a cell phone. Everything that you do is being monitored all the time. So, what's the big, if you don't do anything wrong.
All right, we'll go to our final topic here. It's like Match.com on two wheels for $15. You get a bicycle and a date. And what could possibly go wrong?
I don't know. I met my husband in a bar, and that was a fix-up. So I don't know. What can I say? I guess the $15, it's cheaper than meeting somebody in a bar, right? I mean, how much is a beer today? So it's a cute idea. I don't think I would want to do it in December in Chicago. Would you guys?
No. And I guess if the date goes poorly, you can make a quick exit on your bicycle.
Yeah.
Do you think this will catch on, Daryl?
I think that people are smart. Where singles are meeting nowadays tend to be open area marketplaces. You find more dating going on at a Whole Foods or a Mariano's than you do, at traditional nightclubs and stuff like that. So here's an opportunity for people to meet in an open area that have a shared interest. You're not going to be riding a bike if you don't feel that, you have some sort of conservation aspect to your life.
Might be a little tough to make conversation, but it does get people off the couch, I guess.
It's fun. It's fun. I think it's a great idea, and I think they've done it with around other topics, like craft beers or different things they've done before. So I think it takes off, and we certainly need more young families in Chicago.
It benefits the entrepreneur here because somebody came up with this idea, and we're talking about it. So that's the person that's really benefiting.
There you go. Well,
my worry would be, though, if I were doing it, oh my gosh, before I can do it, I have to spend 6 months getting in shape so I look good in those bicycle shorts. I don't want to scare any date first.
Daryl Denard, Ann Kavanaugh, Anna Maria Soto, thank you for your time. Now, if there is life on Mars, imagine the surprise when the new human neighbors move in. A group called Mars One is planning to launch a one-way trip in the year 2023. Tens of thousands have signed up for a chance to go, including some Chicagoans. But skeptics are shaking their heads at the odd plan to fund this mission and wondering if it will ever leave the ground.
We have ignition, 2, 1, 0. We have a liftoff.
It has been nearly 41 years since man last set foot on the moon.
beautiful.
Since the final mission of the United States Apollo lunar landing program, America's manned exploration of space has virtually stalled.
I think it all comes down to one thing, and that's money.
Now, even the simplest shuttle mission costs billions.
We have to lower the rover below us on a tether.
And technology, unmanned rovers do the exploring at lower cost and with far less risk.
We saw with the Curiosity rover landing on Mars last August, we saw how incredibly difficult it is to land a capable rover.
If landing a rover on Mars was tough, just imagine landing a space capsule filled with humans in this unforgiving terrain.
The surface of Mars has very little atmosphere, less than 1% of the atmospheric pressure of the Earth. What's there is mostly carbon dioxide, so there's nothing breathable on the surface of Mars. You need a full spacesuit.
Even so, Mars is considered the most habitable planet after Earth, a manageable environment.
Hello, people of Earth. My name is Nadav Neumann, and I want to go to Mars.
Despite the challenges, people from around the world are signing up to be the first humans to land and live there.
I've always felt like I was from another planet, and I thought this might be my chance to return to the stars.
This interplanetary move is the mission of Mars One, a Dutch nonprofit made up of industry specialists and space lovers committed to exploration of the universe. So far, more than 165,000 people from 140 countries have applied for a chance to move to Mars.
Future as a species is out there in the cosmos.
Only 4 will be chosen.
It's an opportunity of a lifetime, and I wouldn't pass that up.
It's a one-way ticket that Chicagoan Stephen Gedzik, 31 and single, would take in a heartbeat.
It wouldn't really be that much of a burden to me. I hope that doesn't sound cold.
What does sound cold is life on Mars. The average temperature, 81 degrees below zero. There's also the challenge of getting there.
The more ambitious your mission, the higher the risk. So you're going to be sending up a basically untested space capsule and sending these 4 people on what amounts to about a 6-month journey through space.
The estimated cost of this mission, $6 billion. And Mars One wants to raise the cash by turning this trip into a reality TV show and selling the rights.
Does paying for a $6 billion mission, which they say is $6 billion, which is way too low, does paying for that with a reality TV show, does that really make sense?
What does make sense to Stephen is this once-in-a-lifetime chance to pioneer human life on Mars, contribute to the preservation of one species, and just maybe discover another.
You're going somewhere that no man has gone before, no one has gone before. I can't think of a more exciting job than that.
Think you'd like to join this reality show space mission? You'd better hurry. The application period ends August 31st. That does it for tonight. You are now in the loop.
The conversation continues right now on WYCC.org. I'm Chris Bury.
And I'm Barbara Pinto. Until next week, good night.